Hi, I tell very exciting and horrifying stories to everyone. I suggest you subscribe because I post such stories every day. Story 1. The Watcher of the Midnight Stair. The Inheritance. Eliza Morley never expected to inherit anything. Growing up in foster homes, she believed she had no family to speak of, let alone one that would leave her anything of value. So when a letter arrived from a solicitor, informing her that she was the sole beneficiary of an estate belonging to a distant relative named Evelyn Morley, Eliza was both curious and skeptical. The estate, known as Morley House, was an enormous Victorian mansion nestled in the remote countryside. The solicitor mentioned that the property had been abandoned for nearly 30 years and came with strict instructions from Evelyn's will. The house could not be sold, only lived in by a Morley descendant. If Eliza refused, the estate would pass to the state. With little to lose, Eliza decided to visit Morley House. When she arrived, she found the house in disrepair, yet it retained an eerie grandeur. The windows were boarded up, ivy crept along its stone walls, and the once beautiful gardens were overrun with weeds. Despite its decay, something about the house seemed to hum with life, as though it had been waiting for her. The midnight presence. The first night, Eliza struggled to sleep. The house creaked and groaned, its old bones settling as the wind whispered through the broken windows. At exactly midnight, she was startled awake by the sound of footsteps echoing from the grand staircase just outside her room. Grabbing a flashlight, she ventured into the hallway. The staircase loomed at the end of the corridor, a wide, ornate structure with a red carpet runner that had faded to a dull brown. The sound of footsteps continued, slow and deliberate, as though someone was descending step by step. "Eliza," a voice whispered. Her breath hitched. The voice was soft, almost melodic, yet laced with something she couldn't place, an urgency or perhaps a warning. She shone the flashlight down the staircase, but it revealed nothing. The footsteps stopped. Convinced it was her imagination, she returned to bed, but the uneasy feeling lingered. That night, she dreamed of a woman standing on the staircase, her face obscured by shadows. She pointed to the floor beneath her feet, mouthing words Eliza couldn't understand. The secret room? The next morning, Eliza explored the house in search of answers. She found old photographs, letters, and journals scattered throughout, all belonging to Evelyn. One journal entry caught her eye. "Beware the midnight stair. It is not alone." The entry described strange occurrences Evelyn had experienced: footsteps, voices, and an overwhelming sense of being watched whenever she stood near the staircase. Evelyn had tried to investigate, even hiring priests and paranormal experts, but none could explain the phenomenon. "It is not the house," she had written. "It is something older, something bound to the land itself." Eliza noticed that many of the journal entries referred to a hidden room beneath the staircase. Following the description, she searched the base of the stairs and found a small, inconspicuous door hidden behind a tapestry. Inside was a narrow, spiraling staircase that led into the darkness. The Watcher. The hidden staircase ended in a cold, damp chamber. The walls were lined with stone, and in the center of the room stood an ornate mirror framed in tarnished silver. It was far too large to have been brought down the narrow staircase, and the craftsmanship suggested it was centuries old. Eliza approached the mirror, her reflection distorted in its warped glass. As she reached out to touch it, the surface rippled like water, and her reflection moved independently of her. The reflection smiled a twisted, malevolent grin and spoke. "You shouldn't have come here." Eliza stumbled backward, heart pounding. The mirror's surface shimmered, and a shadowy figure began to emerge from within. It was the woman from her dream, but now she could see her face, gaunt and hollow-eyed, her expression a mixture of sorrow and rage. "I was bound here," the woman said, her voice echoing unnaturally. "To guard this place, to keep it sealed." Eliza tried to speak, but the words caught in her throat. The woman stepped closer, her movements unnaturally fluid, as though she were gliding through water. "They took my life," the woman continued, "and now it will take yours." The escape. Eliza fled the chamber, scrambling up the staircase as the mirror began to shatter, the pieces flying outward as though something inside was trying to escape. The house seemed to come alive, the walls vibrating and the air growing unbearably heavy. Reaching the top of the stairs, she slammed the hidden door shut and threw the tapestry over it. The footsteps began again, this time racing up the grand staircase. Eliza didn't wait to see who or what was following her. She grabbed her car keys and bolted for the door. As she drove away, she glanced in the rearview mirror and saw the house glowing faintly, its windows illuminated by an unnatural light. A shadowy figure stood at the top of the staircase, watching her leave. The aftermath. Eliza never returned to Morley House. She contacted the solicitor, insisting that she wanted nothing to do with the property, but was told that it could not be sold or destroyed. The house remained hers, a burden she could not escape. Months later, she received a package in the mail. Inside was a single shard of the mirror, wrapped in velvet. The note attached read, "It is not finished." Eliza kept the shard locked away, but at night, she could still hear the footsteps, the sound of someone descending the midnight stair, coming closer with every passing night. Story 2. The Whispers Beneath Ashwood Lake. The Summer Retreat. Ashwood Lake was a place of serenity. Surrounded by dense forests and far from the distractions of city life, it was the perfect escape. At least, that's what Claire and her friends thought when they rented the old Ashwood Lodge for a weekend getaway. The lodge was a sprawling cabin with wide wooden decks, large windows, and a panoramic view of the lake. Despite the idyllic setting, the locals had been reluctant to rent the lodge. When Claire asked the owner, Mr. Hawthorne, about it, he brushed her off with a nervous smile. "It's just old," he said. "Some people find it unsettling at night." Unsettling or not, Claire and her friends, Daniel, Elena, and Marcus, were eager to enjoy their weekend. On the first day, they swam in the lake, grilled on the deck, and laughed late into the evening. But as the sun set, the atmosphere shifted. The lake, so inviting during the day, seemed to darken, its still surface reflecting the night sky like a black mirror. The first whispers. That night, Claire woke to a sound, a faint, melodic whisper that seemed to drift through the walls. She sat up, straining to hear. The whispers weren't in English, but their cadence was hypnotic, almost soothing. She dismissed it as wind or the creaking of the old lodge and went back to sleep. The next morning, she mentioned the sound to her friends. Elena laughed it off. Daniel teased her about having ghost ears, but Marcus looked uneasy. "I thought I heard something too," he said, "like singing." The group brushed it off and went about their day. But as the evening approached, the mood grew tense. The lake was eerily calm, its surface so still it seemed unnatural. As the group sat on the deck, sipping wine, they heard it again, the faint, melodic whispers rising from the direction of the lake. The hidden shrine. Determined to prove it was nothing, Claire convinced the group to take the canoe out and investigate. With Marcus paddling and Claire holding a flashlight, they ventured into the middle of the lake. The whispers grew louder, though still faint, as if coming from beneath the water. Then the beam of Claire's flashlight caught something, a structure beneath the surface. It looked like the roof of a building, its edges encrusted with algae and moss. As they leaned over the edge of the canoe for a better look, Marcus lost his balance and plunged into the water. Claire screamed, but Marcus quickly resurfaced, coughing and splashing. "There's something down there," he gasped. "I felt it, a stone or something." When they returned to the lodge, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling of something brushing against him in the water. "It wasn't just stone," he insisted. "It felt carved, like a statue. The legend of Ashwood." The next day, Claire went into the nearby town to gather supplies and decided to ask about the whispers and the submerged structure. At first, the locals avoided her questions, their faces darkening at the mention of the lake. Finally, an elderly woman named Mrs. Halloway spoke up. "There was a town where the lake is now," she said. "Ashwood Village. It was flooded 70 years ago when they built the dam. Most of the villagers left, but some refused. They said the lake would curse anyone who disturbed it." "What about the whispers?" Claire asked. Mrs. Halloway hesitated, then leaned closer. "They say the villagers made a pact with something in the earth, a spirit or a god, to protect them from the flood. When the waters came, they didn't drown, they stayed beneath the lake. And now they call to others. The pull of the lake." That night, Claire couldn't sleep. The whispers were louder now, filling the lodge with their strange, melodic chant. She got up and found Marcus sitting on the deck, staring at the lake. His eyes were glassy, his expression vacant. "Marcus," she called, but he didn't respond. As she approached, she realized he was whispering along with the voices, his lips moving in time with a strange melody. She grabbed his arm, shaking him. "Marcus, snap out of it." He blinked, as if waking from a dream. I need to go back," he murmured. "They're waiting for me." "What are you talking about?" Claire demanded. "They showed me," he said, his voice trembling. "When I fell in the water, there's something down there, a shrine. They want me to see it, the descent." Against her better judgment, Claire agreed to help Marcus return to the lake. Elena and Daniel refused to join them, instead barricading themselves inside the lodge. With Claire at the paddle and Marcus guiding her, they returned to the spot where they had seen the submerged structure. The whispers were deafening now, a chorus that seemed to rise from the depths of the lake. Marcus leaned over the edge of the canoe and plunged into the water before Claire could stop him. "Marcus!" she screamed, but he was already gone. A few agonizing moments later, he surfaced, gasping for air. "There's a door," he said, his eyes wide with excitement. "I saw it, an opening in the shrine. I have to go back." Before Claire could stop him, he dove again. This time he didn't come back up. The truth beneath. Panicking, Claire dove into the water after him. The icy depths stole her breath, but she forced herself to swim down, following the faint glow of Marcus's flashlight. She reached the shrine, a massive stone structure carved with strange symbols. Its entrance yawned open, a black void. She found Marcus just inside, staring at something on the wall. A mural, etched into the stone, depicted humanoid figures kneeling before a massive shadowy form. The figures' faces were distorted, their mouths open in eternal screams. "They're still here," Marcus whispered, pointing to the figures. "They never left." Suddenly, the whispers grew louder, reverberating through the water. The shadows on the mural seemed to move, stretching toward Claire and Marcus. She grabbed his arm, dragging him back toward the surface. The price of escape. They burst through the surface, gasping for air, and scrambled back into the canoe. As they paddled furiously toward the shore, the water beneath them churned, as though something enormous was rising from the depths. When they reached the lodge, Elena and Daniel were gone. The door hung open, and the whispers filled the empty rooms. Desperate, Claire and Marcus fled to the car and sped away, leaving the lodge and its cursed lake behind. The haunting chorus. Days later, back in the safety of her apartment, Claire tried to forget what had happened. But the whispers followed her, faint at first, then growing louder each night. She realized with horror that they weren't coming from outside. They were inside her mind. And she wasn't the only one. Marcus stopped answering her calls, and when she visited his apartment, she found it empty except for a single, waterlogged flashlight on the floor. Claire knew she couldn't escape the whispers. They would follow her forever, calling her back to Ashwood Lake, where the villagers waited in their sunken shrine, their eternal chant promising a fate far worse than drowning. Story 3. The Collector of Forgotten Faces. The Antique Shop. On a rainy autumn afternoon, Callum stumbled into an antique shop on the edge of town. The shop, nestled between two crumbling buildings, had a hand-painted sign that read, "Curiosities of the Past." Its windows were fogged, and the faint scent of aged wood and dust wafted from its door. Callum had no intention of buying anything. He was simply killing time. But something drew him inside. The shop was dimly lit, its shelves crammed with relics. Tarnished candlesticks, faded photographs, peculiar statues, and books whose spines were cracked with age. At the back of the shop, he found a peculiar mirror. It was small and oval-shaped, no larger than a dinner plate, with a frame carved to resemble twisting vines. Its surface was impossibly clear, almost as if it weren't made of glass at all. The shopkeeper, a frail woman with piercing blue eyes, appeared out of nowhere. "Ah, the collector's mirror," she said, her voice soft and lilting. "A very rare piece." "What makes it special?" Callum asked, unable to take his eyes off it. "It remembers," she replied cryptically. "Memories, faces, moments, it keeps them all." Intrigued, Callum bought the mirror for a modest price and brought it home, unaware that he had just invited something far more sinister into his life. The first vision. That evening, Callum hung the mirror in his living room, admiring how it seemed to brighten the space despite its small size. As he sat down to read, he noticed something odd. The mirror's reflection wasn't quite right. It seemed slower, as if it were lagging behind reality. When he leaned closer to inspect it, the reflection changed. The room behind him disappeared, replaced by a barren, foggy landscape. In the distance, a figure stood with its back turned, motionless. Callum spun around, but his living room was empty. When he looked back at the mirror, the reflection was normal again. He chalked it up to his imagination and decided to call it a night. The Forgotten Woman. Over the next few days, the mirror's strange behavior continued. Callum began to see fleeting images in its surface. Faces he didn't recognize, places he had never been. One night, as he sat in front of the mirror, a woman's face appeared. She was young, with pale skin and dark, hollow eyes. Her lips parted as if she were about to speak. "Who are you?" Callum whispered, but the face disappeared. Later, while sorting through an old box of photographs, he found a picture of the same woman. She stood in front of an unfamiliar house, smiling faintly. On the back of the photograph was a name, Eleanor Farrow. Curious, Callum searched for information about Eleanor, but found nothing. It was as if she had never existed. Yet, her face continued to appear in the mirror, lingering longer each time. The collector's story. Determined to understand the mirror's origins, Callum returned to the antique shop, but it was closed. A neighbor informed him that the shop had been empty for years. Confused and uneasy, Callum began to dig deeper. His search led him to an old urban legend about a man known only as the Collector. The story claimed that the Collector was an artist who lived in the 1800s, obsessed with capturing the essence of people. Not in paintings, but in mirrors. He believed mirrors were windows to the soul and devised a method to trap a person's reflection, sealing their essence inside the glass. His victims would vanish, leaving no trace except for their reflection, eternally bound to the mirror. Callum realized with growing dread that Eleanor was one of the Collector's victims. But why was she reaching out to him? The gathering faces. The more time Callum spent near the mirror, the more faces began to appear. They would flicker in and out of the glass, their expressions desperate and pleading. Sometimes he could hear faint whispers emanating from the mirror, though he couldn't make out the words. One night, Eleanor's face appeared again, but this time she wasn't alone. A shadowy figure loomed behind her, its features obscured. The figure raised a hand, and the mirror's surface cracked slightly, a single jagged line running through its center. "Help us," Eleanor's voice whispered, clear and unmistakable. Callum realized the mirror wasn't just showing him these trapped souls, it was trying to pull him in as well. The attempt to destroy it. Panicking, Callum decided to get rid of the mirror. He wrapped it in cloth and took it to the woods, intending to smash it with a hammer. But when he struck the mirror, the glass didn't shatter. Instead, it seemed to absorb the impact, the cracks spreading like a web. For a brief moment, Callum saw dozens of faces reflected in the shards, all screaming silently. Then the whispers began, louder than ever. They filled his mind, drowning out his thoughts. "You cannot break what is already broken," a voice hissed. The shadowy figure from the mirror appeared in the woods, its form flickering like a dying flame. Callum fled, leaving the mirror behind. But when he returned home, it was there, hanging in its usual spot on the wall. The final confrontation. Realizing he couldn't destroy the mirror, Callum decided to confront it. He sat in front of the mirror with the photograph of Eleanor and demanded answers. "Why me?" he asked. Eleanor's face appeared, her eyes filled with sorrow. "The Collector seeks new faces," she said. "He feeds on memories, on identities. He chose you because you are alone, forgotten. No one will notice when you're gone." The shadowy figure emerged again, stepping closer until its form filled the mirror. Callum felt an invisible force pulling him toward the glass. He fought against it, but the pull was relentless. Eleanor's voice broke through the chaos. "There's only one way to end this. Take my place." "What?" Callum gasped. "I can hold him back," she said, her voice trembling. "But only if you destroy the photograph. Erase me." With no other choice, Callum set the photograph on fire. As the edges curled and blackened, Eleanor's face began to fade. The shadowy figure roared in anger, and the mirror shattered, shards flying in all directions. The aftermath. When Callum woke, the mirror was gone. The wall where it had hung was bare, as if it had never been there. He searched the house, but there was no trace of it, or Eleanor. For a while, Callum thought he was free, but soon he began to notice strange reflections in other mirrors. Faces he didn't recognize, watching him with hollow eyes. And at night, he could still hear the whispers, faint but insistent, calling him back to the collector's domain.